Hello, welcome to The Philosopher
And The Entrepreneur.
with Andrew Smith.
And Sherrilyn Billger.
We are here in beautiful Fairmount Park in Philadelphia. This is actually the largest urban park in the United States. We also happen to be in front of the historic Schuylkill River. This is one of the many beautiful spaces we have access to here in Philly. In our companion talk, Take It Outside, we focused on pedagogy. We were talking about combining theoretical foundation and experiential learning, particularly related to well-being and sustainability, personal well-being, ecological sustainability. In this particular talk, instead, we are focusing on practitioners. So whether they are entrepreneurs like me, people who are doing work in something related to plants and ecosystems, household gardeners, or practitioners in the academy doing intellectual work, writing and teaching about climate change.
About 3 years ago, I started working on a book project entitled A Critique of the Moral Defense of Vegetarianism. And when I started talking to Sherrilyn about it, she was a little put off, partially because she and I are both vegetarians, and I'm nearly vegan. I eat very little eggs and dairy. And what I suggested in this book, among other things, is that one can't be a vegetarian. And that didn't go over too well. And you can imagine why. The reason that I say that, though, is because I'm trying to refocus how we think about sustainable eating. And that's the issue that I've really begun to focus on. So while the book got a bit of popular press and a lot of trolling, I'm still focused on the issue of sustainable eating and the creation of sustainable food systems. So let me say a little bit about the departure for the book. I was looking at a blog one day from a popular philosophy site in which someone who was defending vegetarianism suggested that while the onus is usually on vegetarians to explain their eating habits, the onus really should be on omnivores to explain why they're justified in eating meat. I understood it, and when I initially read that, I thought, well, that's not a bad idea at all. And I engaged in the unpopular practice, or probably really bad practice, of reading all the comments. And as I read the comments, one thing became really clear. Everyone, the vegetarians in particular, I suppose, took it for granted that plants aren't sentient. And because they're not sentient, they can't feel, they don't have experiences. Because of that, they don't have the moral standing necessary, according to philosophers, to be something that is exempt from being eaten. So animals are sentient, they have this moral standing, they should be exempt from being killed and eaten by other moral agents. Plants don't have this status. Well, the thought occurred to me because of another book that I'm working on, which I interrupted with this book, but that's neither here nor there. The thought occurred to me that, I believe that, but what if I'm wrong? What if plants are sentient? Now, before you turn this video off and dismiss me altogether, just go with this for a second. One could take a philosophical approach to this and just ask, what if this were the case? What would change in terms of how one defends one's vegetarianism? That was my initial instinct. But instead of just doing that, I decided to go into the actual biology, to look at what's called plant neurobiology. And what I found just was astounding, just blew me away, really made me dumbstruck, by which I mean it rendered me dumb. It rendered me stupid, because I realized that these members of this living community all around me have experiences and ways of living that not only are comparable to mine, but in some ways exceed mine. Plants are sentient. We have 5 senses. Plants have over 20. Plants have a hormonal information processing system that's comparable to our neural processing system. And I know this is most surprising, but plants have intentionality, they have memory, they have wakefulness, and they can even learn. And plants excrete what are called endogenous opioids when they're wounded. Think about aspirin. Where does aspirin come from? It's derived from an acid that's in such plants as jasmine, beans, peas, and clover.
My initial skepticism and resistance to Andrew's book quickly got swept to the side, not only by reading and learning more about the plant sentience literature, but also in considering plants as moral beings. I will often toss out the phrase, plants are people too. I understand some folks, including some philosophers, would find that offensive, but what I mean by that is that plants deserve some moral consideration. And that has impacted the way that I deal with plants individually when I'm doing the work, the way that I talk about plants and home ecosystems with my clients, and the way that I train my employees to do the work that they're doing. This is one of Eating for the Ecosystem's projects, restoring a native woodland. Here's one of our employees, this is Annie, hand applying compost to nourish the soil and support our new native ground cover plantings. I'd like to recall the 4 pillars that Andrew discussed in our companion presentation, Take It Outside. There was respect, consent, trust, and empathy. I believe all 4 of those things are aspects of our relationships with plants, and often we don't act in ways that acknowledge any sort of consent on their part. We trust them to do all sorts of things for us without doing much for them. We don't necessarily feel empathy, and we aren't treating them with a whole lot of respect all the time. So I want to be part of a movement changing that, where trust goes both ways. We trust them to soak up rainwater. We trust them to help purify the air and help to moderate temperatures. There's so much that they do for us, apart from providing food or food for our food. But I want us to act in a way, hopefully, that is more respectful and honors the role that we all play in larger food webs and ecosystems.
My central premise, I'd say, when it comes to these issues is suggesting that we do best to support local ecosystems and living communities. And this comes with what I would call 4 principles. 4 pillars in the last one, 4 principles in this one. Sorry, I guess I deal in 4s. The first principle is that plants matter a lot. We depend on them utterly. And it's no coincidence that they make up 95% of the world's biomass. We barely think about them. That's because they do successful work for us all the time, as Sherrilyn suggested. Second principle, eating ethically isn't primarily a function of who we eat or what we eat, but of how we relate to the beings who we make our food, and also to the ecosystems that we're both part of. Third, sorry if you hear some car noise in the background. We're right next to a fairly major road. Third, developing and sustaining eating practices that position one within what I call the trophic network of one's proximate ecological community is both life-enhancing and life-affirming. What I mean is that the proximate ecological community is one's ecosystem, where one lives. And what is sustainable, or what's most sustainable, I suppose, is eating to the best of our ability within this food web. Food web is a trophic web, a web of eaters. We can be part of that, or not. We're dependent on this ecosystem for our well-being. It makes us ill or keeps us well. Most of us don't eat a whole lot of food from directly where we live. Doing better at making an effort to do that is highly beneficial, not just for us, but for our ecosystems. And fourth, food sovereignty, or a form of food security, I suppose, depends on the production of what I call biocultural foodscapes. This is simply a way of acknowledging that the landscapes around us are food, not just for us, not just for the beings who become our food, but for the beings within our living community. Everything is food for something else. Food sovereignty depends on production that acknowledges that and works with that. So I'm not just talking about locavorism. I could eat locally from businesses that are profoundly polluting. What I'm talking about is supporting a foodscape, a food web that in perpetuity, that works for the beings where we live, for us and for others.
And something that I'd like to add, when I think about doing right by the plants, right by the ecosystems, all of the creatures, the way that we eat, our current food systems have done a whole lot to decimate habitats all over the world. And I believe that if we are eating with this kind of convenience, for us, like Gardein burgers, we're eating things that aren't produced right here. We're benefiting from this global industrial agricultural system. We then have a responsibility to ecosystems and creatures who have been harmed by what's been going on to make convenient food for us. So even apart from eating locally, I believe we have a responsibility to try to enhance and restore ecosystems that we've lost. We don't have a lot of meadows anymore, a lot of prairies. Stream banks are often problematic. Forests. We, apart from the food that we might grow, the plants that we might have that perhaps look pretty, we have, I believe, an obligation to replace some of what has been lost to the best of our ability.
It's interesting to note, I think, that what Sherrilyn is doing is actually supported by two fairly recent UN studies. The first study focuses on preparing for impending energy descent. It's what's commonly called peak oil. Now, that might not seem intuitive, but it's connected with this second study that argues for the importance of supporting the reemergence of small-scale farming. Doing these two things, preparing for energy descent and going small scale, has two important overarching benefits. The first, it drastically reduces the ecological and climatological effects of industrial agriculture, or what a friend of mine once called toxiculture. Secondly, it broadens the scope of agroecological methods of production. Agroecological methods are methods that are designed to be organic and sustainable. So what is it that we can offer the practitioner? I'll focus on two things. First off has to do with the soil. Caring for the soil, for the land. This is perhaps the most critical investment that we can make. Healthy soil means healthy plants, means healthy us. In turn means healthy soil. But this has much bigger issues, climatological issues and ecological issues. This facilitates the rejection, or at least the mitigation, the reduction of the use of pesticides in favor of integrated pest management. This reduces and reuses waste throughout the entire food system. This helps to regenerate and build soil, which increases the capacity for soil to hold water, which is absolutely critical given that climate change leads to both deluges and droughts. So this provides a bit of a buffer. And this also, working on soil, increases fungal and bacterial activity. Secondly, this works best with a hands-on approach. What we want to do is encourage the protection of food sources that are suitable for local growing and raising conditions. Food sources for us for the beings who become our food, and for the beings that we share this living community with. This is the backbone for a more diverse, safe, nutritious, and affordable diet. When food systems are in turn reorganized within these local networks, entire communities can have greater food sovereignty, in part, by reducing the entire amount of energy required to provide their food. Less transport, less processing, again, which is also healthier.
I'd like to talk a little bit about how practitioners in landscaping, arboriculture, related fields, and home gardeners can perhaps act differently if they consider plants as beings with moral consideration. So we could go through a whole host of examples of that, but more so I think it's about a frame of mind, seeing plants as living creatures that grow, that are affected by the environment that surrounds them, and that they respond to changes. So one of the big things is we just need to look at them more. So just see what's actually going on. Recognize the importance of the soil. So coming back to what Andrew had said, it's the soil, stupid. That's almost always the problem. If you have something that's dying, there's a nutrient missing, or there's extra metal from something, or it's where there was a construction project and they just pulled the top 1.5 feet of soil off the ground. It's usually the soil. We also know that in this field and in lots of others, there's often a disconnect between researchers and practitioners. So part of trying to bridge that gap is what we're doing here, having this kind of dialogue, this conversation, and learning how we can enrich each other's work. And hopefully that is something that could happen for other people too, and that it will help us discover and implement better solutions for the problems that we're facing. Thank you for listening.